Hello everyone. It's been a while since I've done a video or a book review. Today I'm going to do a book review. Thank you for subscribing and following us. We really appreciate you. We've just hit over 500 subscribers and we've done that thanks to you. Thank you for following us and liking our videos. My name is Reverend Penelope Stewart. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you for being here today with me, loved ones. I'm going to do a book review today on The Witch's Ointment. This is a really great book. You wouldn't think from the title that it was a really good book. I learned about it in one of my groups. Because I always want to know more about our ancestors and the root workers and the way they work with herbs and things like that, and how they work with herbs and on a metaphysical level. And this book was really great. It talks about the history, and then it talks about the history of the herbs, and then tells you how they use many of the herbs. So this is a very informational book. If you're into herbalism or plant healing or plant shamanism, or you're Wiccan, or you're practicing some type of indigenous spiritual practice, you want to know more about herbs, this is a really good book. And I got it because I do a form of plant shamanism. And so I'm constantly reading more about other people's experience with plants and with shamanism. So I get these books for my research, and also I got it to read for a new class that I'm getting ready to launch here in April, a shaman class. It's called Cannabis Shamanism. If you're interested, it's going to be an online course, self-paced, if you're interested in that. But this is a really good book. It really helped me learn some new things. I thought I learned some things. I had learned some things, but this taught me some more things. Really good book if you want to go back to the roots of herbalism, if you really want to know what really happened to those more ancient, older religions, what happened. So, because this has a lot of history in it too, a lot dealing with the the witch hunts and all that stuff. So, really good book. So, I'm just going to read it back to you. This is a brief summary of the book, and the summary is really good too. In the medieval period, preparations with hallucinogens, herbs, were part of the practice of the Venetium. So people back then that worked with herbs, they weren't called root workers. Some of them were called Venetium among the European culture. The ones that were root workers and also quote unquote practice magic as well, folk magic as well. They were called Venetium or poison magic. The collection of magical arts used poisons, herbs, and rituals to bewitch, heal, prophesy, infect, and murder in the form of psych magical ointments. And they call that too psych, so that's something. I always call it psycho-spiritual, but here they call it psych magical ointments. Poison magic could trigger powerful hallucination, surrealistic dreams that enable direct experience of the divine. Smeared onto the skin, these ethnogenic ointments were said to enable witches to commune with various local goddesses, bastardized by the church as trips to the Sabbath. Clandestine meetings with Satan to learn magic and participate in demonic orgies. That's what the church said. That's why they cut it out. They start going against it. Examining trial workers and the pharmacopoeia of witches, alchemists, folk healers, and heretics of the 15th century, Thomas Hatsis details how a range of ideas from folk drugs to ecclesiastical fears over medicine women merge to form the classical witch stereotype and what history has called the witch's ointment. Through his study of rare manuscripts from university collections all over the world, Hatsis provides detailed evidence that in the preparation of their remedies, medieval folk healers used a wide variety of psychoactive plants along with ritual practices and magical incantations. He explores the connections between witches, ointments, and spells for shape-shifting, spirit travel, and bewitching magic. He examines the practices of some Renaissance magicians who inhale powerful drugs to communicate with spirits, and that of the Italian folk witches such as Matuccia. I thought that was interesting. This sister right here, they really did her in. She was a very powerful root worker of Venetia, they called them back then. She was very powerful, and they talked about her a lot in the book. They start off talking about Matuccia di Francisco, who used hallucinogenic drugs in her love potions, herbal preparations, and Francesca, who used drug ointments to imagine herself transformed into a cat. Is exploring the untold history of the witch's ointment and the medieval hallucinogen use. Hatsis reveals how the church transformed folk drug practices, specifically ethnogenic ones, into satanic experiences. So that's what basically they did, and he shows that in his book. This is a very good book if you're into ethnogens. If you're into shamanism, herbalism, this is a really good book. I really enjoyed the book. I'm going to read a few places out of each chapter, some of the chapters I highlighted, just to give you a brief snapshot of the book. I thought this book was awesome, and it told me a lot of things. I learned a lot of things, but let me dive in. This is chapter 1. This is chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the Helen's Tears. Chapter 1, page 8. I think I'm on. Yeah, page 8. These then were some of the threats of Caterina faced on her way to see Matuccia di Francisco, a simple sorcerer and herbal healer whose renowned magical skills attracted clients from far and wide. So, she was known far and wide. Everybody knew about her. The Hatsis was one of the first to use the Grecian name for the mixtures of chants. Oh, wait a minute. The Venecia of such magicians included natural diuretics, purgatives, and psychoactives. The Venecia, the practitioners of the Veneficia, harbored knowledge of plants, poisons, understood the differences between medicinal and fatal doses, and conjoined them with magical practices. So they took, they would take poisonous drugs. They used poisonous drugs too to make some of their, medicines or concoctions as well. And you see some of that stuff in pharmacy and stuff too. Sometimes they have to use some harmful stuff to make medicines. Too much of it, will hurt you. So you see that as well. So you have your first pharmacies, your first root workers right here, making this stuff, making these herbal concoctions and stuff. Demodenices was among the first to use the Grecian name for those mixtures of chants and poisons of pharmacus, from which the word pharmacist derives. See, he ordered the death of the theorist, the reason for her trial. The Nemesis explains was her drugs, pharmaca, which she used to either drive people mad or cure their ailments. Pharmacus would become the customary word for wise woman. So did you not know that? Or witch? So before pharmacist was known as that, it was also known as wise woman or witch. And that's what witch means as well. Witch means wise one or wise woman. That's what witch mean as well. So they go in here kind of explaining what the Venecia is, what pharmacus is. I thought that was important. That was interesting to me. And then it talks about some of these Venekias. This is where they talked about some of these Beneficias right here. A diviner says sometimes several of these skills overlap in a single person. Indeed, a diviner might possess knowledge of the Beneficia, and the Beneficia might prophesy as well as poison. There was no telling what kind of odd skills a local magician might possess. Proximity to forest herbal knowledge passed down from generations, experience gained through trial and error, and many number of sources contributed to the formula of the Veneficia. Many herbs remain unknown, he wrote, because only illiterate country folk try them out, for they indeed are the only ones who live among them. He cites that abundance of educated doctors as the reasons most people living in the urban areas remain ignorant of folk herbs. There, centuries later, St. Augustine gave an early and general caution as to the drugs of the country folk spread about Christians seeking magical medicines. So some of them was against some of it. But that lets you know, because I know my grandmother and them, they showed me things. My grandmother knew things that other people didn't practice. She had her own way of healing. My great-grandmother did too. So they would make up their own concoction. I think my great-grandmother, she had this own concoction that she would make for pain that included snuff, alcohol, and something else. Something that she would make for my aunt for her back pains, and it included tobacco, snuff, and all that stuff in it. And it worked for my aunt. And this was her own concoction that she used to make. And she was a Blackfoot Indian. So, she came up with her own concoction, and it worked wonders for my aunt. Beneficia, y'all know I'm the worst at pronouncing things, so please excuse me. Beneficia held no degrees or certification, attended no meetings, and gave no lectures detailing the secrets of their affairs. They were acknowledged as medicine women and men only by their clients. They had no extensive cult connection that bound them together, though they did learn from, teach one another these arts, thus carry knowledge of psychotropic, medicinal, and poisonous herbs, roots, and animals from antiquity, from even the darkest of ages and into the Renaissance. So they letting you know this stuff they had been doing this stuff from ancient times. This came from a long, long time ago, and they just passed it down from their family from generation to generation. And I seen a lot of that in my family too. I learned from other people too. I seen that in other indigenous people family. They would teach me things that I didn't know. And then I learned some things in my own family that they did for remedies and things like that. They would treat themselves with different things. So I saw that too in my family as well. So you see that, and it varies from one family to another, from one generation to another. Just to let you know. And then it jumps back in here and talk about Meticia. Meticia. I may be pronouncing it wrong, like I tell you guys. I'm not the best pronouncer, but I read very good, fluently, I think. Meticia was not a social outcast spurned by her neighbors for her magical practices, but was rather a famous sorceress specializing in love magic, who served many people. Unfortunately, it was becoming apparent in Europe at this time. See, they was trying to stamp a lot of that stuff out. They didn't want women, this new religion was coming in, this new era was coming in, men patriarchs were taking over these religious practices, and they had their own God that they created, and so these women were really raining on their parade. And that's when you kind of see religion shifts into more of a patriarch masculinity type of religion. So, and you feel that shift in this book. You see that because some of these stories that you read in this book are ridiculous. Some of the things that they make up about these women that they do is totally ridiculous. And you just like, oh my gosh, but these women were killed because of this. Some men too, because they practiced the old ways. They were killed too. but a lot of women were killed. You know, there was a big power shift with religion and gender as well. So you feel that throughout this book as well, as you read some of the stories in here. Those with a stake in magic will sooner or later find themselves tied to one. A transition was taking place. The sorcery and superstition remedies used by medicine women and men that had in the past largely been disregarded by authorities was looking ever more demonic to judges, lawyers, lay magistrates, and of course theologians and demonologists. Metucha was but one of many folk sorcerers who represent a way for us to understand the tectonic shift. Okay, so they're letting you know there was a shift going on, just like what I said. Until the late 18th century, religion, magic were intimately tied to medicine because much medicine had found a home in the monasteries. Local healers represented a magical competition to the arts of medical clergymen who castigated the lay healers, curious and satanically inspired. Restraints on such magical medicinal arts vary in time and place. Many times those variations depended on gender. Other times they did not. While women did not necessarily outnumber men as healers, they were certainly viewed as ascets by the more misogynistic members of their community. So you see that gender shift going on. You see that happening. In England, 14th century, for example, physicians successfully lobbied to legally ban uneducated male physicians and all women, educated or not, from the medical practice. So you see what I'm saying? So whether or not women were educated or not, and this was in the 14th century. This is in the 14th century. So you see that shift that's going on from that feminine energy, spirituality into this masculine, strict religion, very rigid religion. So this is a very good book if you're interested in the history as well. But I'm gonna get into the herbs. But I had to cover this. Give me a moment and let me cover some of this, and we'll be getting to the herbs soon. I thought the herbs were simply very interesting reading how they applied them and used them. So we'll get to that in a minute. This is chapter 2, In the Silence of the Deepest Night. This book is just what? It's 200. It's a little over 200 pages. It has about 7 or 8 chapters in it, because they don't list the chapters in the beginning, I don't think. The chapters are not listed in the beginning. Oh, yes, they are. It has 9 chapters. Yeah, it has 9 chapters. You know, it's a really good book if you're interested in the history, like I said. This is the 2nd chapter, In the Silence of the Deepest Night. The goddess Diana first appeared in Western Christendom and found conveniently in the Bible. As Paul of Taurus, the Apostle Paul, continued his journey in Macedonia by the way of Ephesus, his converting of polytheists to monotheism started to rouse the ire of Demetrius, a local silversmith whose core business rested in forging shrines of Artemis or Diana. Fearing both a spiritual and financial loss should his customers turn away from the goddess, Demetrius rallied other silversmiths and various artisans to put a stop to Paul's missionary activities. There is a danger that Artemis will be scorned, he yelled before an angry mob, and that she will be deprived of her majesty that brought all Asia and the world to worship her. So there, he's really getting mad because Paul is coming in there. He's coming in there preaching Christianity, and everybody is into this feminine spirituality, and everybody all over the world worship this mother god. And so Demetrius, he's just like, no, I'm not having it. And then he doesn't want it to interrupt his business, because he makes all the altars for this feminine spirituality. So he don't want Paul coming up in here raining on his parade. So that's basically what's going on here. I thought this was very interesting when I wrote this. I mean, when I seen this, I was just like, whoa, that's very interesting. So, and you see that, and I'm glad this is a really good book, because you really get a chance to see the struggle that's going on between the feminine and masculine energy in this book. You know, and you can see that too in the symbols. I talk a little bit about that too in the book review symbols, but this book you can really see it, and it kind of connects. It connects the world together as well. I think the mob seized Paul's Macedonian companions, Gaius, Austraeus, Aristotrus, y'all know I can't pronounce, and began chanting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So, you know, they seized them. You know, they didn't want them there, and they didn't want Paul there. And it says, once the preliminary passions passed, however, the crowd simmered down and eventually dispersed, and Paul's companions were released to him. Many within the crowd, it turned out, didn't even know what they were protesting. Okay, so you seen a lot of this stuff going on. The belief in Diana was persistent into 10th century. Common folk still worship her or believe they roamed the night with her, as the canon of Captivity alleged. And Diana wasn't alone among the deities. And so after this, and when this happened too, not only did you see, these different the Diana come up, then you have these other patriarchs creating their own deities, and it just gets ridiculous. You have to read this book; it just get ridiculous. They'll just make up stuff. They start tormenting other people with these other made up deities. These patriarchs have made up. So like I said, this is a really good book. If you're interested in history and herbs. Let me go on. That was 2. I'm going into 3. Did I mark anything in 3? Yes, I did. 3. In chapter 3 is the heretic potions. It says, one group with roots stretching back to antiquity that certainly employed drugs for this later reason still exists as late as the 1880s. Tucked away in the northern region of the Caucasus Mountains, the curious explorers would find the Assyrians, a group with Iranian origins whose beliefs have called bizarre mixture of Christianity, ancient superstition. They worshiped the Hebrew prophet Elijah, sacrificed goats to him, ate meat, skinned the carcasses, and placed the fleeces under a tree. They then prayed to Elijah to bestow an abundant harvest on them. They also prophesied by intoxicating themselves with smoke from burning the highly psychoactive, I can't pronounce this, rhododendron bush, falling into a deep sleep and interpreting the lucid dreams that follow as real events. Okay, so they let you know, and I read this too. I was reading that, I think that was in my book, where some of the, back in, I think it's the earliest, the 1300s, 12th century, that some of the Jewish rabbis used cannabis in some of their spiritual practices as well. So I saw that in some of the Jewish history, they use it as well in their little incensers. Okay, so, and they inhaled the smoke. And so this also left me an idea too, that, these prophets that you see in the Bible or whatever, were they using some type of smoke? Were they using some type of psychoactive thing? Because in this book, it tells you, usually that's what they were using, but they were not allowed to divulge that type of information to tell people how they were going into these trances, how they were traveling into these different realms. That was something that they kept from people, not unless you became an initiate. And when you became an initiate, you knew that secret, how they were prophesying and tapping into these realms. So I thought that was really important to highlight. So that's why I read that. Another reason to take intoxicants during ritual practices was for pain relief. Saint Maximus of Turin wrote emphatically against such practices found within the cult of Diana. The priest of Diana would drink much wine in preparation of some kind of self-flagellation rite. And he didn't like that. Now, that was, that one, I don't know what was going on there, but you had people protesting it as well because, when you don't understand something and you don't understand how it's used or whatever, that tends to happen. So, you'll see that in this book as well. And that was chapter 3. And I think, we're jumping into the herbs. I'm going to jump into the herbs here. I'm going to jump into this, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and close this book out. I try not to keep y'all long because I can go on and on. I can go on and on with these book reviews. I love them. I love giving book reviews and just sharing this knowledge with you guys. The 4th chapter is the roots of bewitchment. And it talks about the herbs. And I have some of that highlighted. The first one I highlighted was Deadly Nightshade. And I don't know if you guys, have you watched Luke Cage? Do you remember that guy? I think it's Luke Cage, 2nd season. And this guy takes this nightshade, this root worker gives him this nightshades to give him this power. And then later on, this young lady, she's a herbalist, and she goes on to provide this nightshade for him to give him this sort of power. So I thought that was very interesting, especially when I started reading this book on nightshade. Reading this book and it talks about nightshade. So let me just talk about nightshade. Dr. Jeremias rushed to the bedside of a son, a local bookseller. The lad had last been seen playing in the garden of the physician, philosopher, instrument maker, Gemma. Now, as a physician, as well known for growing nightshade along with several other exotic herbs in his garden because of the boy's useful impetuosity, he ate a single nightshade berry off the plant. He soon descended into insanity, weak in body and spirit, and could no longer remember who he or his family was. Eventually, the hallucinatory phase passed, and the boy crashed under the nightshade juice's powerful soporific spell, remaining asleep for a full day. After the doctors applied a few professional remedies, the boy fully recovered. Okay, they said he was lucky to even live. Okay, the bewitching plant found utility in a variety of ways. In the early 11th century, the Earl of Macbeth, the very Macbeth on whom William Shakespeare would model his infamous character, decided on one last effort to expel the invading Norse from Scotland. After surrendering to the king, Knutson, and taking refuge in Perth, Macbeth sent provisions to his conquerors. A great quantity of bread was before sent, together with wine, ale, into which he had been infused poisonous herbs, commonly called sleeping nightshade, a shrewd form of medieval psychochemical warfare. The results did not disappoint. Macbeth sent Lord Banquo and his army to seize the enemy camp. They panicked and intoxicated. Norsemen stood no chance. Other soldiers remained asleep, perhaps not even awakened. Knutson probably imbibed the bulk of the spoils. He couldn't be roused and had to be quickly thrown like a burden over a baggage horse. So he used this nightshade to conquer the Norsemen in battle. Women found uses for nightshade and beauty products of the early period. The word belladonna, beautiful mistress, probably comes from the red juice from the berries that was used as rouge. A second plausible explanation behind the name might come from the other use of nightshade berry juice as an eye drop to enlarge women's pupils to make them more attractive. This latter beauty practice, however, seems to have been a local to Venice, as there is a scant indication that it existed elsewhere in Europe. Nightshade, also called salata, has various uses: to assuage swelling, to soothe earache, toothache, and to stop bloody noses. One an ointment that includes as ingredients nightshades, pennyroyal, wild thyme, and other herbs. It is rubbed on the forehead of those who have suffered traumatic head injury. And then they go on to tell you other uses for it as well. So like I said, this is a really good book, especially if you're going to be working with herbs or something like that. And then the other one they talk about, the Torah. Very good, like I said, it goes into detail. The Torah also comes in 20 varieties, amplifying taxonomical nightmares that has existed in the West since the days of the courtesans. Like I said, it goes into detail talking about these different herbs in the root section. I was very interested in the root section. Not so much of the history. Some of the history that I did know. But then when I got to reading about the history, it became interesting as well when I started reading about the history. It talks about hemlock. Hemlock also had medicinal applications such as poultices, used to cure stomach pains, and eye salves. The leaves also relieve all types of swelling, pains, or discharges. One of these manuscripts includes the earliest reference to the anesthetic sponge in the Western world. It was a soporific sponge used to put patients under before surgeons could cut them open. So they tell you how to use hemlock as a pain blocker too during surgery. Really, I thought this book, that part was really good. Talks about ergot, a fungus that grows on diseased rye grain and thrives in human temperatures and is identically base element of psychedelic LSD. Very good stuff in this book. If you're interested in herbs, if you're interested in the history of the root workers and what happened, really good book. And again, this book is called The Witch's Ointment, The Secret History of the Psychedelic Magic. Really good book. And I just tipped the iceberg with this. I didn't even go through all the 9 chapters with you. Really good book. I hope you enjoyed this book review. Thank you for being here with me today and subscribing to the channel and liking our videos and supporting us. Again, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And soon I'm going to be launching a course on Cannabis Shamanism. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link down here if you're interested in my Cannabis Shamanism course. I'm also doing a Know Thyself course. I would tell anyone, I would recommend you, if you have not did the inner work on yourself, if you have not dealt with your traumas or anything like that, take the Know Thyself course first. Establish your spiritual foundation first before you take the Cannabis Shamanism class. Okay, so I'll leave a link down here to both of them. My Know Thyself class starts up in January, and then my Cannabis Shamanism class, it starts up in April. But if you have not, if you do not have a spiritual foundation and you just awaken, take the Know Thyself course first, and then take the Cannabis Shamanism class, okay? But thank you so much for watching and supporting. Light and love, may the ancestors be with you.